When I moved into Willow Creek Estates, I believed I was stepping into a peaceful suburban haven where my son, Mason, could grow up surrounded by friendly neighbors, safe streets, and a supportive community. I'm a single father. My wife passed away when Mason was just 5, and ever since, my life's purpose has revolved around him. Mason was born with cerebral palsy and uses a wheelchair, but he's the brightest, funniest, most insightful 12-year-old I've ever known, and I'd do anything to make his life a little easier. That's why I installed a wheelchair ramp on the front porch of our new home, placed a small medical equipment storage box near the garage, and set up a sensor light that would help him come in and out without tripping hazards. I never expected those small changes to invite the wrath of the self-declared queen of the HOA, Meredith Granger, a woman whose entire identity seemed to revolve around her title as President of the Willow Creek Homeowners Association. She introduced herself on day one with a laminated copy of the community bylaws and a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "We pride ourselves on maintaining a uniform aesthetic," she said while glaring at Mason's ramp like it was some kind of graffiti. I kept my tone calm, reminding her the ramp was ADA compliant and legally protected, but she simply sniffed and said, "Rules are rules. Exceptions make neighborhoods look sloppy." I didn't argue, at least not then. I knew people like her, power-hungry, attention-starved, and always looking for someone to step on. Over the next few months, she proved just how petty and persistent she could be. She sent formal violation notices for everything from Mason's therapy van being parked in our driveway for too long to the small wheelchair-accessible sign I had, posted near our mailbox to help delivery drivers. She even called in a landscaping complaint when Mason's therapist left a folding walker leaning against the porch for 5 minutes during a session. I tried to reason with her to explain that these weren't choices, they were necessities. But reasoning with Meredith was like trying to explain jazz to a jackhammer. She escalated things by trying to fine us, though our lawyer reminded her the ADA trumped her rulebook. That should have been the end of it. But it wasn't. She wanted a war. And then she made the mistake that changed everything. She brought it to court. The HOA, under her leadership, filed a formal complaint in small claims court against me for unauthorized modifications to property that disrupt community uniformity, and she even had the nerve to cite visual clutter and declining property values. I was furious, but composed. I knew exactly what to do. I gathered every document, every doctor's note, every ADA compliance code, and every communication I had with the HOA. What she didn't know, what she couldn't possibly know, was that I wasn't just a father defending his son. I had spent the last decade working in legal research and advocacy for families with disabilities. I had helped craft some of the very ordinances she was now pretending to interpret. But the most delicious twist of all was one I didn't even orchestrate, the judge assigned to our case. The Honorable Judge Rosa Martinez, a fierce, respected, no-nonsense jurist who had spent years championing civil rights cases and had a long, public history of siding with underrepresented families in ADA-related disputes. Meredith strutted into court like she was about to win a beauty pageant. Dressed in her HOA-branded blazer, clutching her binder of supposed violations, she smiled smugly across the courtroom at me and Mason. I had told Mason he didn't have to attend, but he insisted. "I want to see what justice looks like," he'd said. That boy had more dignity in his little finger than that woman had in her whole body. When the case was called, Meredith launched into a rehearsed, condescending monologue about community standards, property values, and the danger of setting precedents. She barely acknowledged Mason's existence until she did. "And while we all sympathize with Mr. Thompson's situation," she said, gesturing casually toward Mason like he was an inconvenient appliance, "we simply cannot bend the rules every time someone claims a special circumstance. That's not how a fair community operates. If we allow one ramp, soon we'll have garden gnomes and hammocks on every porch." I saw red, but Judge Martinez spoke before I could. She leaned forward, removed her glasses, and stared directly at Meredith. "Ms. Granger, are you aware that the Americans with Disabilities Act is not a special circumstance, but federal law?" Meredith stammered, clearly off script. Well, yes, Your Honor, but we have our own community standards." And those standards, Judge Martinez interrupted, do not supersede federal law. I've reviewed the photos, the documentation, and the so-called violations, and not one of them constitutes a legal breach. In fact, it is your HOA that may be in violation for attempting to discriminate against a resident on the basis of disability. The courtroom was dead silent. Meredith's face drained of color. She opened her mouth, but no words came out. Judge Martinez continued, now with the weight of authority in her voice. You're lucky the Thompsons haven't filed a countersuit for harassment, because based on this documentation, they would likely win. Meredith froze in place, still gripping her binder, now visibly trembling. I turned to Mason, who was trying not to smile, and gave his hand a squeeze. Furthermore, the judge added, I am hereby dismissing the HOA's complaint with prejudice, and I strongly advise the Willow Creek HOA to review its practices, bylaws, and leadership structure. This court does not tolerate petty abuse of power, especially at the expense of a child with a disability. And just like that, it was over. For now. But that wasn't the end of the story. Not even close, because Meredith's actions had triggered something far bigger than a courtroom scolding. Complaints were now being filed by other residents, ones who had been afraid to speak up. The media would soon get wind of the incident. And Meredith? She was about to learn the hard way what real accountability looked like. Mason looked up at me as we left the courtroom, eyes shining with pride. That, he whispered, was what justice looks like. And I smiled because I knew this was just the beginning.